Welcome to the Donovan and Jorgensen Heating and Cooling Friday Night Rivals pregame show. I am Mike McGivern. Thanks for joining us. It's week 4. Cannot believe how quick the high school season goes. For tonight's game, we head into the Woodland Conference for a matchup between the Grafton Blackhawks and the Wisconsin Lutheran Vikings. So let's look back. A year ago in conference, Wisconsin Lutheran and Grafton both went 6-1, with Grafton winning the head-to-head matchup 48-22. But that's not the only time they played last year. Both teams made it into the Division III playoffs, with Wisconsin Lutheran bowing out in Level 1 to, again, Grafton, 49-15. Then Grafton went on to beat Port Washington, Menasha, and Stoughton before losing in the state championship game to Rice Lake. Both teams have some key players back from last year, and both teams come into this game 2-1 overall and 1-0 in conference. We're now joined by the head football coach at Grafton High School. He is Jim Norris. Coach, how you doing today?
We're doing all right. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. I'm really excited about tonight's matchup against Wisconsin Lutheran. Before we get into football, Coach, when we talked a few days ago and we talked about your family, you said, hey, my kids don't care if we win or lose. When I get home, it's playtime, and I love that. Coach, how is that going? You getting any sleep nowadays?
Yeah, we're getting on track. I'll tell you one thing, though. My kids are too young to really, understand the full process and everything. But my wife, on the other hand, if we're not winning, I'm sleeping in the offices. So,
well, she comes from a big football family, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I think brothers played up at Wisconsin. One is still playing there, correct?
Yeah, JP Benchall's still playing.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to come over for Thanksgiving. I don't know if you guys do any kind of Thanksgiving turkey bowl. I don't want to play in it, Coach. I just want to grab a seat and watch some of that. There are some competitive people in that family.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, it's fun to be a part of.
Hey, Coach, let's, not to bring up a sore subject, but we talked about that first week, and you guys took one on the chin, and we had a long conversation that if you're going to lose one, maybe that first non-conference one, to kind of catch these boys' attention a little bit. Look, you guys came off last year. You got to the state finals, and I think that was a surprise for some people. And then to come out this year and drop the first game, and I told you this, I don't think that was a bad loss if you guys are learning something from it. And you said, look, they came back to practice that next day and that next week with a chip on their shoulder, and I think this is going to help us in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's important to face adversity, especially early in the season. It's actually something I talked with our captains about. By no means did that adversity need to result in a loss. But, it shows you that you're mortal. You have things to work on. You have things to improve upon. That any given Friday against any team, things could, go south. We face adversity. And it's important to handle that early in the season. So,
Coach, the other part of that, when we had that discussion, that's the first opener that you have dropped as a head coach at Grafton, and I'm wondering for you personally, how do you bounce back fairly quickly, right? You get a little upset, and then you think, okay, let's make sure that not only our coaching staff but our players are ready to go for week 2.
Yeah, you kind of hit on the head. This uncharted territory for me and our program, and in life, and this is something that we talked to the team about. When you're in uncharted territory, control what you control, each and every day. And I told our seniors right after the game and the leadership within the team, it's like, all right, so the question is, what do we go from here? And I think it's important to understand that every single one of our goals that we set forward to accomplish were still in front of us and still attainable. And how to attack it, it's simply, grabbing your sledgehammer, grabbing your hard hat, your lunch pail, and going back to work. When things get tough, go look adversity in the face, go punch it in the mouth and go back to work.
Coach, I got to tell you, you hear this a lot, that over time players start to resemble their coach, right? And that's the kind of player you were, right? You brought your lunch pail, you'd hit a guy in the mouth and then say, hey, nice game after the game. But I think that when I watched Grafton play last year, that's what I saw. Defensively swarming to the ball, offensive line guys finishing blocks. If they can get a pancake and add a little syrup, they're doing that. And I was really impressed with just the overall toughness of your entire team.
Yeah, we're it's something that we talk about, day in and day out. And, it comes from our process and, how we attack the weight room and how we attack, practice and the little things and the detail early in the week.
When you talked about going to the senior leaders, I want to talk about a couple of those players. Tommy Lutz is a kid that we're very familiar with him. He was our U.S. Marine Player of the Game last year as a junior against Greendale, and he has started the year really well.
Yeah, he's one of those kids that you can rely on, and just brings a great attitude to practice each and every day. To people on the outside, they see the stats, they see the touchdowns, they see all that stuff. But, for us as coaches, we get to see him every day. And, obviously, he has big games, each and every Friday. But to us, it's a product of his work ethic. It's a product of his leadership. And when you get 11 guys or 10 other guys blocking for him the way they do, it just goes to show his type of character.
Yeah, the second one would be Brady Hilgard. He a quarterback that I know that when we talked before the Greendale game a year ago, you said, look, this kid's really coming. It's his huddle. He's starting to spin a little bit. He can throw it. He's starting to read defenses. You were very impressed with him near the end of last season and said, look, he's a kid that can carry us a long way. And again, a senior quarterback, feel pretty good about where he's at right now?
Yeah. Obviously, from our perspective, we've, been able to see him develop through this off season, and he's, continue to find ways to get better and continue hammering the details of the position and, reading defenses and making good decisions. He's had a tough go around in the recruiting world, which, with any kid, it weighs a lot, on a kid. But that's just the way it is right now with the transfer portal, with the landscape of college football. He'd probably tell you the same thing. In game one, he was pressing, he was trying to, go get stats and, completions. And, at the end of the day, it's like I sat him down after the game and said, Brady, I just need you, man. I just need your best version. And the reason you got here and to the position you did was, you're a playmaker. You make good plays. You make, smart reads. You're smart with the football, and you operate our offense, in a highly efficient way. So,
hey, Coach, I really appreciate your time. Last year against Wisconsin Lutheran, you guys beat them in regular season and conference, and then beat them on that great run that you made. They're going to bring you their best shot tonight, and what they're thinking about is a little bit of revenge for 2023. So I wish you and your team a lot of luck. And Coach, I got to tell you, you and I get a chance to talk every once in a while. I'm just a big fan of yours and the way you go about doing your business as a head football coach at Grafton. So thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me.
You got it. That is Jim Norris. Let's get to a break. Other side of the break, we're going to be joined by Coach Joe Redu from Wisconsin Lutheran High School. This is the Donovan and Jorgensen Heating and Cooling Friday Night Rivals pregame show only on My 24.